Salutations, time travelers, and welcome to everything that is, ever was, and will be. Today I'm going to show you how to enable time travel in your game with some simple code and understanding. Before you see a game. It really has no objective. I have my character, he moves around, things fall from the top of the screen. Notice I have this recording around the border here. Ultimately, that's what we're doing. We're recording every step that's happening on the screen of every object moving around. And in order to reverse time, all we're going to do is go back through the steps that we have saved to the point where we want to continue from, and then we just say from there we wish to continue, and then we resume the game. So here we have at the bottom, it has recorded 1000 and nearly 400 steps, and if I hold down enter, as it says here, hold enter to rewind time, time goes back. Playback speed at the top you can see is 1 times, and if I push A, it increases that time all the way up to 5 times the speed. And if I let go of the enter key, we resume from that point where we stop. And everything continues, and we change what we are doing. We alter our decisions because we know the things we did ended up poorly, and we want to change that. And just hold down enter, go back further, resume, enter, resume. Check that out. Cool, huh? Just like that. So I'm going to show you how to do this with a few lines of code. You will be able to add this to any game you've been working on. That's how cool and abstract this controller is going to be. I call it the Object Spacetime controller. Yeah, so you'll be able to add it to any game that you currently have. Now this is probably one of many ways to approach this concept. In this case I'm using an array to store all the steps. There might be other ways, but this is the way I prototyped the other day. So here we go. Let's jump right into this project and see how it's done. To start this off, I'm going to pretend that I have a project that has no space-time concept at all. It's very linear. You do things, that's the way it goes, there's no turning back. So that's what I've got right now. I've got a few sprites, the player, over here, you've got the mob, little thingy that spins around over there, and in this game, perhaps you're supposed to dodge these things, as we saw in the preview before, but in this sense, we don't have the time-traveling ability. So we dodge things, if we get hit, maybe we die, whatever. So that's what we've got now. In our objects, we've got object player, and in its step, it just has something to check its image angle over there, and some basic movement, right, like that. Then, that's all it's got in the step. The mobstacle over here, in its create, it's got its degrees. This is just to give it a random spin, a random speed, and it's active when it starts. Its step is to increase its Y depending on its speed, so it's just going to go from the top of the screen to the bottom, and increase or change its rotation and its image angle depending on its degrees that it's given. If it collides with the player, if it is active, then it's just going to warp to the top or above the edge of the screen and then travel down again. And if it's outside the room, so if we miss it, if it doesn't hit the player, it's going to do exactly the same thing. It's going to warp back to a random start position off screen at the top. Then don't worry about object HUD, we'll get to that later. In our rooms over here, game world, it is completely empty. I've put nothing in this game world except what this might be. That's not supposed to be there. So there's nothing in the game world. If I go into settings and I go create code, notice over here we are creating the player in the middle of the room. Then we are creating 10 of these object mobstacles. If you don't know about for loops, check out the tutorial in the banner. I do a tutorial on for loops and explain what they do. So that's what we're doing. We're creating 10 of them at a random position right over there, and they'll stream down from the top of the screen and the game will begin. So in your case, if this is your game that you've been working on for many years, many months, many days, whatever, I'm going to show you now how you can add time travel to your game. So firstly, we're going to go here to the creation code of our game world. We can add some global variables that the game is going to use. Now, Object Spacetime Controller is just going to tell the objects when they should record their step. And to do so, it's going to need a global variable, global dot recorded step, and it's going to be set to 0. On start, it's going to tell all the objects that if you're allowed to record, start at 0, right, like that. Then we can have global dot step multiplier, and this is going to tell us, well, if we are going back in time, what is the speed at which we're doing that. Right now we're doing 1 times. So if we were to go back in time, we would be doing so one step at a time, and then pushing A or Z would increase or decrease this multiplier and change the speed at which we go back in time. Next, we're going to have something called global.control, and we're going to set this to true. Basically, this global control variable is going to tell the player whether he is allowed to listen for input from the user. So when we are going back in time, we no longer have control. We are just going through the array from where the last recorded position all the way to the beginning. And when we're doing that, we have no control, so global control will be false. But when we start, we need that to be true, so we can move around and start recording what we are doing. Then we're going to have something called global is recording. It's going to be a boolean that's going to say, well, when do we start recording? You can set this to false and then at a later stage have a key press that starts the recording. But in our case, I'm recording from the start. Alright, so we've got the recorded step, the step multiplier, the control, and the is recording. Those are our primary global variables that we'll need. Then we'll also need to create an instance of something I like to call object spacetime controller. We're going to just put it at 1010. It can be anywhere in the room as long as it's present. Spacetime controller. That's it. I haven't created the object yet, so that's alright. And let's also create that HUD. Alright, so that's done. We're creating the global variables, so we're creating the player in the middle of the room, we're creating our object spacetime controller somewhere, it doesn't really matter, and then we're just putting our HUD on top of that. And then the 10 obstacles right over there. So now let's jump right into the object spacetime controller. This is going to be keeping tabs of the steps and telling the objects when they can record. Right, like that. It needs no sprite at all. So in my example, as you saw before, we would hold down the enter key, and that would enable us to go back in time. And as soon as we let go of that enter key, it resets all the arrays of the various objects that we're recording and set it back to 0. So we have an opportunity to go back in time. If we mess up that opportunity, that's it, it's gone. From where we messed up, it'll start recording again from 0. So here we have object spacetime controller, and we're going to add a create event right over here. Drag in some code. If we hold down the enter key, it's going to go back as far as to the beginning of the recording, all the way back from the present step, all the way back to the step 0, where the game began. So, in here we're going to have a variable called held. And right now, it's set to false, because we are not holding down the enter key when we start. Push OK. Add step event. So now it's going to be listening for certain things. Drag in some code. So we created a few global variables. One was is recording, one was global control, another one was the recorded step, and the step multiplier. Those were the 4. So here we're going to say, well, if we are recording, so if global.is recording equals true. So if we are recording, now that means that we are allowed to take our global.recorded step, and we're going to increase that one, plus equals 1, or you can use plus plus if you want. Yeah, so if we are recording, then we are increasing our recorded step. Now this recorded step is going to be used in each of the objects that we want to record. It's going to be used in their array to save their position, right like that. So that's that little piece of code. Now, we're going to determine if the player has control. If he does, then we're going to make sure that that step multiplier is always 1. If he doesn't, then it can be whatever he's put it in. If the player has control, we want to make sure that it's always recording every step and not skipping steps. So here we say, well, if global.control equals true, then we're going to take, let's do that, no man, there. Then we're going to take global.step multiplier, and we're going to set that to 1. Always 1 when we have control. Otherwise, if we don't have control, then we're going to say, well, if, do some of that, global dot recorded step is greater than 0. So as long as recorded step is greater than 0. So this means if we don't have control, it means we are going back in time. So as long as there's a next step to decrement, then over here we got to say, oh, also we've got to take into account that we are using a step multiplier. So while we want to decrease the recorded step, we've got to make sure that if we do decrease it, it doesn't get negative, because there are no negative numbers in an array, and then it's going to throw up an error. So here we're going to say, well, if global.recorded step minus global.step multiplier, oh, there, is greater than 0. Okay. Then we're going to take global.recorded step, and we're going to minus that over there. Minus equals over there. So as long as we can decrease the recorded step by whatever the multiplier is, because this can go up all the way up to 5. So by decreasing by 5 steps instead of 1, the speed is going 5 times faster. So otherwise, if we can't do that, then here we're just going to say else, and then global.recorded step equals 0. So if in the end we get to, for example, we've got 4 recorded steps left, and the multiplier is 5, so it wants to go down. So if it had to decrease by 5, we'd end up with minus 1. So instead of doing that, it's just going to say, well, if it isn't greater than 0, so if this turns out to be false, then here we're going to say equals 0 instead. So in that last step, we're going to just set it to 0, so it's reducing it by 4. But it's so minuscule you won't notice that, especially if you're going 4 times speed in the back in time. Now at the same time here we've got this if saying, well, if our recorded step is greater than 0, do stuff. But what happens if it does get to 0 over here? If it gets to 0 from going back in time, it means that there is no more memory of the previous steps. We don't have any more recordings. So we're going to set global.control to true. So the player now has control, and it's going to start recording all over again, just like that. Easy. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a very complex piece of code, but I'm going to go through it step by step here, and hopefully you can understand it as simply as possible. So, if we are recording, then we're going to increase our global recorded step. This is the value that's going to be used in the step event of every object that we want to record. So we're going to create a 2D array. In the first element, it's going to have this recorded step, and in the next element, it's going to have 0 for the x value, it's going to have 1 for the y value, and 2 for the image angle. Alright, so if you don't know anything about arrays, check out my tutorial on arrays, and that'll bring you to speed, and then come back to this. Otherwise, let's move on. If we have control, then we want to make sure that our step multiplier is always 1, right, like that. If we don't have control, it means we're going back in time. And then here we check, well, when we're going back in time, basically what we're doing is we're setting the current value of the object to that of something it has recorded previously. So in this case, we are decreasing our recorded step from what it is now all the way down to 0. So here we're saying, well, if our recorded step is greater than 0, so there's still some memory of that object's whereabouts beforehand, then we're going to check firstly if we decrement it by whatever step multiplier is, we need to make sure that it doesn't get below 0. That's what we're doing right over here. So if it here is testing that if it's still greater than 0 when we do that minus, then we can do the decrementation. Otherwise, we're just setting it to 0. Right there. Otherwise, if it's now 0, I mean here you could say else if global.recorded step is 0, it means there's no longer any more memory or of that object's past. So that's as far back as we can go. Give the player control again, and then it'll just start recording all over again. So right like that. So that is pretty much the controller. Over here I'm going to add the keyboard check event for the enter key, which is going to only detect if it's held down, then do stuff. So here we're going to say if keyboard check vk enter. And here we're going to first check if global.recorded step, we're going to grab this, is greater than 0. Then here we can say global dot is recording equals false. Then we're going to say global dot control equals false, and held equals true. So we're holding down the key. We are, first let's go from the top. So if our recorded step is greater than 0, so if we have some memory, it means that we are no longer recording, because we're now going back in time. We no longer have control of our objects, control equals false, and we are holding down this key. Next, we're going to say otherwise. So if we're not holding down this key, which is every other time, we're going to say global.is recording equals true, like that. So when it's not being held down, it is recording. And here we're going to say if held equals true, right over here, add some code. We're going to say global.control equals true, global.recorded step equals 0, and held equals false. So if we're not holding it, it means that we are recording. If held was true before, it is now false. We have control, and we are resetting the global record step to 0. So this would take control of that whole making the mistake. So if you push enter, and then you let go of enter, you've already used whatever back in time juice you had, and now you've got to, record from that moment onwards. That's what that does. Then next, we're going to add the increasing and decreasing of the step multiplier right over here. So it's a check pressed. I'm going to copy this. Add pressed to that. Add ord. And then add a. One of those. Get rid of that. So we're pressing the A key. Then we are going to first check if global.control is false. If it is, which means we are going back in time, because we only want to increase this step multiplier if we are going back in time. We can say if global.step multiplier is less than 5, A is the increasing, Z is to decrease. Then we take global.step multiplier and increase by 1, just like that. Alright, then we're going to copy that and do the same for the Z key, only it's going to be opposite, so if it's greater than 1, or greater than 1, yes, we're going to decrease over there, because we don't want to go past 1. 1 is going to be the minimum amount of steps we can go back in time, and 5 is going to be the maximum. So as long as that's good, we can do all that. Alright, so that takes control of those. So now that we have this controller, this is the control you add to every room that you want to enable time travel. And now we have, we click OK, that's the only stuff that we have for the spacetime controller. We have the create, which has that held variable, then we have the step, which manages whether we're recording, whether we have control, what the step multiplier currently is, and all the objects in our game are going to be using these variables to determine how they are saving their state. So now we're going to head over into all the objects that we want to take advantage of this concept. So first we've got object player, and right now in its step it just sets its image angle and it moves around. Pretty simple. So all we're going to do to this object is in the step event where we have all this, I'm going to bump this all down, and we're going to first question some of those global variables. We're going to say if global.isRecording equals true, right over there. So if we are recording, it means this object better save its current variable into an array. So here I'm going to create an array called p-array. Again, if you don't know how to use arrays, check my arrays tutorial. It'll bring you to speed of what is currently going on here. We've got square brackets right over there. Then over here we're going to say global.recorded step, right like that. Then here we can have 0. So that's our one dimension recorded step, depending on what object space-time controller is saying over there. And then it's going to have 0, and this is going to equal x. And we're going to copy this twice more. 1, 2. Change this one to y. Change this one to image angle. Then this is going to be 1, and this is going to be 2. Now the reason we use a global.recorded step over here is because I want every single object or instance of an object in the game room to return to the exact same step, and it's all going to be synchronized. So that's why we have a global recorded step. So if we're recording every one step that this executes, it's going to save its x into the very first element of whatever the current step is. It's going to save the y into that same first dimension. It's going to save the image angle into the second spot of that dimension. That's all we're going to do right over there. So now move on to the next part. That handles the recording. If you had other things that this object did, then you can just increase the elements in this array. So this could go all the way up to 3, 4, whatever. But do remember that it is recording elements into this array, like, depending, could be 30 times a second. So it may take up a lot of memory in the long run. So I guess you could delete objects and recreate them to free up that memory. I do suggest you do that. So next we're going to say if global.control is true. So if we have control of the situation, it means we're allowed to move around. So we're just going to take all this code that lets us move and plonk it right in here. Right like that. Okay, so if we've got control, we can now move around, just like that. Then we're going to say, well, else, if we don't have control, then what we're going to do is, it means that we are actually going back in time. If we don't have control, we're going back in time. So now we want to set the current x value of this player to that was stored in a certain element of this p array. So I'm going to copy this p array, right like that, go into here. First we need to check that if global dot recorded step is greater than 0, like that. And we're going to smack that in there, and in this case we're going to say x equals y equals and image angle equals. Remove all these. But there is one big thing you need to do right over here. Now, even though we are recording each step as it is, when we play this back, you've got to understand that the way it's working in this whole story is the object spacetime controller is a separate entity to the object player and the object mobstacle, right? And every other object in your room. So when you stop recording, it's first going to stop this here. It's going to stop that variable, and it's going to set control to true right here. But that means that when it gets here to the very first part, we are no longer recording, so it won't record the very last step, that step where you stop the recording. So to start going back in time, you have to go to the previous element, one right before we stopped it, and that's from where you will be going back in time from. Big thing to note there. Do not forget to add your -1 when you are going back in time. So as long as we have as long as our global recorded step is greater than 0, we can set the current x, y, and image angle to that of the stored in the array right over there, the 0, 1, and 2 position. So that's what you add to every object. I'm going to show you how to do it to that mobstacle too. So if we're recording, record our current x, y, and image angle into this array. If we have control, move around and do stuff. Remember, when we have control, we are also recording, so it'll do it in there. It'll also have that. Then if we don't currently have control, it means we're going back in time. Set our x, y, and image angle to the value stored in the recorded step. And remember, in that object, our object spacetime controller, it's going to be decreasing this recorded step by 1 every step that we are going back in time. So that'll handle all that. So now let's go into our object mobstacle right over here. A quick run over of what this has. In our create, we have the degrees. That's just to set its random spin and its speed. It's just to make it look all exciting, and it's active when we start. Our step just has that it needs to fall from the top of the screen, and it needs to increase its image angle depending on what degrees is. If it hits our player, it's just going to warp to the top of the screen again. If it's outside of the room, so it doesn't hit our player, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to warp to the top, as long as we have control, right? Don't forget that. We need to make sure that if we are doing things, we have to have control. If we don't have control, then it mustn't execute any of this code. It must just go back to its previous coordinates. So right over here, we're going to first go into our step event over here. So this is what we had. Now, like we did in the object player, firstly, I'm going to bring all this down like that. I'm going to go into our object player, into the step. I'm going to copy all of this code. I'm going to show you how easy it is to add to any object. Back into here, paste it, just like that. We're going to delete all the code in the global control, just like that. We're going to take what we had and place that there. So when we have control, it's going to do those things, just like that. Then over here, it's going to have its own P array. It's going to track the global recorded step, and here it's doing the same X, Y image angle. And when we are going back in time, it's going to set its X, Y, and image angle depending on the values stored in global recorded step -1, 0, 1, and 2 elements. Just like that. That is how simple it is to implement this into your own game. So once that's done, I mean, that is pretty much it. You go, okay, we check in our collision with the object player. Make sure that it says over here also only if I can just go into step. Make sure it's that. If we have control, then we need to collide. Bam, bam. Because there's going to be a collision when we're going back in time. We don't want it to mess with this. We want it to get back to its position. When you're going back in time, it's just like watching a video in reverse. We're not changing what happened. We are just watching it, letting it happen, and saying from which position we want to resume. Just there, okay? And then outside room, I already had that global control right over there, and that'll warp it to the top. So that about wraps up everything. We have the object player, and we have the obstacle, we have the space-time controller. Put that right at the top. That is the most important element. That tracks everything, and it tells the object player and the obstacle and every other object in your game whether it should save its current position into its P array, which is short for position array. Right over there. And then in our HUD, I've just got some code to make it look dramatic. Show record equals true, alarm 0. That's to make it blink. Yeah, that makes the whole thing, if we're recording, show that, blah, blah, blah. It's not necessary, it's just to make it look exciting right over there. So you can go through this. I'll add the studio project as well as the GM8 project, yeah, to all those guys still using GameMaker 8. It will be heavily commented, so if there's some things that you didn't understand in this video, check out the comments. You can also drop a line in the comments if you want below this video, and I can get to you and answer any questions you may have. So let's push play, and you'll notice that it should work exactly the same way as it did in the preview. There we go. We're recording every step. Notice there, step 140, 150, 160, 170. I have control. I am moving around. This is what control is. Just like that. And if I want to go back in time, it says you hold enter to rewind time. Oh, it looks like we had a little coding mishap. Recorded step. This is step event 0 of line 12. Let's just fix that. Spacetime controller. Step 12, I think there was. You always got to check for spelling errors. Well, let's go OK. We can just play that. Yeah, we are recording, hold enter. Now we're going back in time. If we let go of enter, it starts the recording from 0 again. Check that out, see? And anything we collide with that would have been teleported to the top of the screen again, notice when we're going back in time, it's recreated. Well, back to where it was because it's recording its position. So if we let this go for quite some time, I'm going to try to get it up to 1,000. Then I'm going to go back in time and show you how that multiplier works. So maybe we collect a few of these. Let's grab a few of these. And we're going to notice that when we're going back in time, they're going to pop up from where we collected them. Oh, there we go. Move our image angle, let's spin this around a bit. Oh, that's cool. Okay, it's nearly 1,000. Gets to 1,000, I'm going to hold down enter. There we are. We are going back at 1 times. We are not recording. Notice our steps are decreasing. If we push A 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, it's going super fast. It's going back in time. And if we, there we go. Going back to that exact same spot. If we release enter, holding enter, release, holding, release, holding, release. See that? Going back in time. So if we wanted to get this one falling towards us, and we miss it, oh no, we missed it, I want to go back in time to the point where we didn't, we were in line, resume time, and grab it. We have changed the outcome of that situation simply by recording what happened before and enabling us to go back in time by setting the current value of our player to that of the recorded step. Pretty easy. So you can add this to any of your games in any way. It doesn't matter. It could be a platformer, it could be a top-down adventure. It doesn't really matter. Remember, this just records its X, Y, and image angle, and you can record any other type of variable that you wish, as long as you place it into its P array. And do know that it does use an array, so the longer you record for, the more memory it will eventually use, but it's rather minuscule at present. I mean, I've only got each one of these objects flying around, these little things, has its own P array, and it's running quite nicely. I'm still getting 30 frames as the steps go up. I mean, it'll probably use a few megabytes every few minutes. So if you want, you could destroy these, it'll free the memory, you'll get that memory back. Or if you had a platform adventure kind of game, you could record only from checkpoint to checkpoint, and then when you get to a new checkpoint, it just it refreshes that P array, sets it all back to null, and starts all over again. So that's how you can recycle your memory over and over. I suggest you do that. If you have a better way of doing this recording time, drop me a line. This is just a prototype idea I had the other day. So yeah, there could be other ways, more memory efficient ways, but this will work for now until I find a different one to show you. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this tutorial educational and helpful. Please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. If you're feeling generous, you can buy me a beer sometime. You can find the project file for GameMaker 8 as well as Studio in the description. The project files will be heavily commented, so if there's anything you didn't understand, you can also check that out. Links are all in the description. If there's anything you don't understand, again, drop a line in the comments below, or you can put a message on channel discussion. This has been quite an exciting tutorial. Worked on it for a couple of days just to make sure it was all fine-tuned and easy to implement into any one of your games. So again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time for another great GameMaker tutorial. Cheers for now.